Good morning. My guess is if I were to walk around this room to each of you this morning and take out your phone, I would find that there are two different types of people in this room, right? If I looked at every single one of your phones, I think I would find there are two different types of people in this room. One, some of you that have 0 notifications on your email, and those of you that have like 13,678 notifications on your email, right? Yeah. The little red dot on your phone causes me stress. Like, I want to just come to your phone and clear that for you this morning. If you get nothing else out of church, bring your phone to me and I'll do that for you. But that would be great. Two very different types of people in this world. Two other different types of people in this world. Those who call this candy up here on the screen Reese's, and those who call this candy Reese's. If you call it Reese's, you're wrong. Yeah, you're wrong. All right, I got a couple more. Those of you in this room that wake up every day with one alarm, or those of you who need a little bit of insurance, that you're indeed going to get up and you set like 5 alarms. Yeah, that's a few of you out there. I wish I was a morning person. I am not a morning person. Today was a double check the alarm is set type of day. And last but not least, those of you who strategically get the toothpaste out of the tube, and those of you who just haphazardly get a little toothpaste out, right? This is actually where my perfectionism kind of goes away. I just get the toothpaste out and brush my teeth. I don't care to get it all perfectly out. I saw another picture of this where around the tube of the one that's just squeezed, there was like toothpaste all around the outside of the tube. And I could tell whoever was posting that picture was a toothpaste perfectionist, because they just threw the judgment on the people who squeeze it out, right? But there's two different types of people in this world, right? Hey, today we're telling a story for the last time in a series where Jesus is talking to two very different groups of people, like more so than any of these groups of people we've talked about so far. Jesus has two very different groups of people in the room. And before I go there, this is the last week of the series. If you're new here today, everybody else is envying you because they think I'm beating a dead horse this morning with this story of the prodigal son. But we are moving on. Next week, you do not want to miss. It's Horizon Sunday. And then after that, there's some study booklets. We're moving on to another series back there. But I want to go back to Luke 15 today. This is Luke's record of something that Jesus did. And I think that God wants to speak to us through this story one more time. And so we're going to pick up in verse 1 like we have several of the weeks. So Luke 15, verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. This is one of the two very different groups of people. So the tax collectors and the sinners, they're not two of the groups. The tax collectors and sinners are one of the groups, are gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law, here's group number 2. The Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Right here, I want to stick on these first 2 verses for just a second, because right here we have these two different groups of people, tax collectors and sinners, and the Pharisees, teachers of the law. The Pharisees, teachers of the law, are probably, are the religious people, the church people. If you're a church person, if you go here regularly, this is maybe who you would identify with. They are over here and they're muttering, Jesus is spending time with sinners and tax collectors. Right? And up to this point, Jesus had already gotten frustrated with the religious people a few times, right? And my guess is as this is going on, he's starting to get a little bit frustrated. There was a time earlier on where Jesus didn't wash his hands, and the Pharisees were like, "You're supposed to wash your hands, and it's not for germ reasons, it's just for religious reasons." And Jesus is like, "No, you're not getting the point. That's not the point." There's another time that Jesus heals somebody on the Sabbath, and they're like, "You're not supposed to do that." And he's like, seriously, you guys are not getting it. This is not the point. We can heal on the Sabbath. Wouldn't you help somebody on the Sabbath? And so over and over again, Jesus is getting a little bit, my guess is, frustrated with the religious people. And here we are again. They mutter oh, Jesus is spending time with the tax collectors and the sinners. And so Jesus starts to respond to this situation. He starts to respond, and the Pharisees are probably over here like, oh, he's going to bring the hammer down on them. He's going to realize he shouldn't be hanging out with them and say, oh yeah, I guess I'll hang out with you good people, right? Instead. But we know from the story of the prodigal son that we've been looking at for several weeks that that's not the case. Jesus responds in the exact opposite way. And he addresses what's going on in the room. Why does he even address the fact that these people over here are muttering about these people over here? Why does he even address it? Why doesn't he just move on? Because the situation in the room is so important to address. Jesus knows what people's muttering can do. You know this too. Most people do not have a bad church experience or do not leave church because of things that Jesus said or things that Jesus did. But some people leave churches because of things that church people do or church people say, right? Some people leave churches over that. There's a rise in our nation right now of people checking the box of their religious affiliation being none, right? Are you a Christian, or what faith do you identify with? And more people are checking, my religion, I don't really have one. My faith is none. And we know that this isn't just a statistic. This is people we know, people we love. It might be your kids. For some of you, it might be another family member. But people who are leaving their faith for reasons of church people and how they act. And so the decline of Christianity in America underscores something that's been true for generations, but seems to be even more important now. And that's this. Many expressions of Christianity are fatally flawed. Many expressions of Christianity are fatally flawed. This was the Pharisees. They're on the start of the Christian movement, but they are kind of getting the main point wrong. And so just like what's starting to happen here, most people's bad church experiences are the result of somebody prioritizing their view over how they prioritize you. Somebody who prioritizes their stance or their opinion on something over how they prioritize people. And so how can we as a church make sure our version of Christianity is not fatally flawed? Make sure we get this right. And I think the best way to do that is to line up what we like with what he likes, right? If we can like the same things that God likes, we'll get our version of Christianity as close as we can to what was intended. So what does Jesus like? He's about to answer that for everybody in the room to hear, for both the religious people, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, and also for the tax collectors and sinners. He's going to answer for all the people in the room to hear what he is about. And he does so in story, right? We've been looking at one of those stories, the story of the prodigal son, and I do want to remind you today that the prodigal son is a story. It didn't actually happen. It's Jesus' response to this situation. There's been weeks that we've been in the series that I'm like so into it that I'm like, I wonder if the place where the pigs and this younger brother were, I wonder if you could find that place. No, you can't. It didn't actually happen. This is just Jesus' story as a response to what's going on in the room. But before he tells this story as a response, he tells two other stories. You might be familiar with them. If you're still in Luke 15, turn to verse 3. This is called the parable of the lost sheep. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it together. He joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep." I tell you, in that same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. And then he goes on and tells another story. That's story number one. Story number two is called the story of the lost coin, a parable of the lost coin. It says, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one of them. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and she calls her neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. One of the things I love about Jesus is he teaches in a way that whether you're a Pharisee or teacher of the law, or whether you're a sinner or a tax collector, you can understand what he's saying, right? Before getting married, I never wore a wedding ring. I'm married to that girl who introduced me, by the way, so that's cool that she was saying that. But before getting married, and I agree, I think right back at you, babe. Give me some points. But before we were married, never wore any jewelry. So when I started wearing a wedding ring, it was a little bit different to me. A little bit different. And constantly, we've been married 3 years now. I'm always playing with my wedding ring. Like, it's almost never on my ring finger. It's usually on one of my fingers, but I'm just playing around with it. If I'm talking to you, it's probably going hand to hand, place to place, right? And so occasionally, or as my coworkers would say, almost every day, I drop it and it rolls somewhere and I lose it, right? In fact, 5 days into being married, we're on a tour bus on our honeymoon, and I drop it, playing with it, and the tour bus is going downhill, and so the ring rolls down the whole tour bus. I can tell it didn't go all the way to the front, but I didn't know where it stopped in between me and the front. And so I had to do something I otherwise wouldn't do. I wouldn't necessarily be going under strangers and looking for things. Some of them probably thought I was about to take their purse. If I tried to explain what I was doing, if they paid attention, but if they didn't, I just had to look under everybody's seat. And finally I found it under somebody's far seat that wasn't paying attention. And so I got down low and reached under, grabbed it back, right? And I was relieved. I was like, oh, good, I found this, right? And this is what Jesus is doing. He's teaching in a way that everybody understands. Everybody knows what it's like to lose something that's important to them. And the tax collectors and the sinners are starting to see that Jesus is spending time with us because we're important to him. And then Jesus tells a third story. We've been in this story for the last 6 weeks. It's the prodigal son. And up till this point, what we've looked at in the story is really similar, right? There's a younger son, who asks his father for his inheritance. If his father gives it to him, he goes out and he blows it on wild living. And then he debates with himself. Things get so bad, he's like, should I go back? Could I go back? I love what Pastor John said last week. As he's on his way back, rehearsing in his head how he's going to ask for forgiveness, wondering how his father's going to respond. His father comes to him, embraces him. It says, while he was still a long way off, while the son was still a long way off, his father came up to him, right? Aren't you glad we have a God who comes after us while we're still a long way off? And so, in this story of the prodigal son, a lot of things look the same, right? What's lost is important to God. What's lost is important to God. But this story goes a little bit further. And my guess is, as Jesus is telling this story, he maybe even turns to the religious people saying, this part is for you to hear. I want you guys to hear this. And so if you are a church person today, I think it's something important for us to remind ourselves of. Pick up with me in verse 22. But the father said to his servants, quick, Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked him, "What's going on?" "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. I don't want you to miss this next line. So his father went out, because no matter what we have going on, God will always pursue us. His father went out to him and pleaded with him. But he answered, "Father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. I never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him?" "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." What is lost is important to God. I want to talk about a few things here that I hope we as a church take from this story. They're all going to be statements that are like, Horizons, let's be a church that does this, or Horizons, let's be a church that does this. And in a lot of ways, I think we already are that church. I'm proud to be part of this church, and I think we do a lot of these things. But in the same way, I think they're important things to remind ourselves of, because we all are all human. Number one, Horizons, let's be a church that doesn't mutter. Let's be a church that doesn't mutter. You got to realize the reason Jesus even told these three stories, the reason Jesus even told these stories is because this group of people, the religious people, are muttering that Jesus shouldn't be spending time with these others. There's a story of a church where everybody wore suits. It used to happen all the time, right? A church where everybody wore suits, and it was super full one day. And partway into service, a man wanders in, and he obviously looked like he didn't belong because he was wearing tattered clothes. He was very unkempt. And so he wanders in, and as a few people in the back row start to notice, they start to elbow their spouses or whisper to somebody near them, wondering what this guy is doing showing up. And the church is so full, he can't even hardly find a seat. And so he starts to walk down the center aisle. And by this point, everybody's heads are turning. Everybody's like, what's going on? We're in the middle of service. What's this guy doing? He gets up to the front and he just sits on the ground. And so now all the elbows are going. Everybody's looking around. There's an usher in the back. And everybody's like, you got to do something about this, usher. You got to do something about this situation. And so the usher in his suit starts to walk down the center aisle, and he gets up to the front. And when he gets up to the front, he sits down with the man for the rest of the service. Let's be a church that doesn't mutter when somebody seems different than us, but that joins them exactly where they're at. Number two, Horizons, let's be a church that responds out of gratitude and not out of obligation. Let's be a church that responds out of gratitude and not out of obligation. You notice the older brother said, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, right? He's like, all these years I've been slaving for you. I never disobeyed your orders. He got his view just a little bit off, right? Because his father shared everything with him. And instead of responding out of gratitude, he started to respond out of obligation for what he did. But at one point, like the younger brother, he was welcomed into something he didn't ever deserve. let's remember how God welcomes each of us back and let our gratitude guide how we act. Number 3, Horizons. Let's be a church that doesn't throw stones. Let's be a church that doesn't throw stones. You notice the older brother also said, but when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes, right? That's what the older brother starts throwing these words to the father. I find it interesting that as Jesus told this story in the first part of it, he never mentioned the word prostitutes, right? Jesus said earlier in the story, he squandered his wealth on wild living. But then when the older brother got to start talking about what he did wrong, he was throwing out that he squandered it on prostitutes, right? He got more specific and started to jab at the younger brother who was coming home. Let's be a church that doesn't hit at people for what they've done wrong, but rather celebrates when they come home. A friend of mine's daughter is just learning to stand up on her own. So she's pulling herself up on everything she can. Crawling over to it, putting her hand on it, standing up, every once in a while even standing without holding onto it. But what also happens is occasionally she falls down. She gets the wide eyes and you can tell she's just starting to go down and she falls. But none of the adults that are hanging out, when she falls, sit there and say, you shouldn't have done that. That's wrong, right? No, they celebrate when she gets back up again. And when she continues to take steps forward. But for some reason, in the church, when somebody gives their lives to Christ and falls back into old habits or old routines, we think it's best to yell at them and say, you're doing this wrong, or question their integrity if they ever even did it for the right reasons. Let's be a church that doesn't throw stones. Lastly, Horizons. Let's be a church that places the you over our view. Let's be a church that places the you over our view. Right? I know in a room this size, our view is not probably all the same views, right? There's a lot of independent views on a lot of different topics. But no matter what they are, let's be a church that prioritizes people over our stances. Because most bad church experiences are the result of somebody placing their view over you. Something Jesus never did and never asked us to do either. Self-righteousness and legalism are left over the Old Testament laws, which Jesus replaced through his death on the cross. So to sum it all up, what can we do as a church to remind ourselves how God wants us to be, to get our version of Christianity as right as we possibly can? And I want to sum it up like this. The fact is, if he likes to party, if Jesus likes to party, we like to party, right? Maybe you know the song. I based it off. Honestly, also, when I had to have Justin fix this slide, I had to fix it in the program. It's your blank. We like to party. You know, like the song, we like to party. We like to party. Yeah. I thought it was catchy, but everybody tried to autocorrect me in the process. But isn't it true? If when somebody comes home to God, if he likes to party, shouldn't we just like to party with him? Yeah, but they did this. They really messed this up. Their heart's not in the right place. Yeah, but if he likes to party when they come home, we like to party. David's going to come up and close this series out with a last song. We're actually going to close today with 2 songs. So offering will be during the second song, but we're going to close the series out today with a song. I think you're going to find it meaningful. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that, when I started here at Horizons, I had the opportunity to go intern at a church in Kansas for a summer. Horizons gave me a summer off to go intern and learn at a church in Kansas for the summer. And while I was there, I met tons of great people, similar to here. Tons of great people. And so any chance that I got that year or two following, I loved to go back down there. I loved to go back down there for celebrations that they had. They had church anniversaries or whatever. And one particular winter day, I was down there at this church and talking to the other people in the office. And while I was in there, one of our friends, a guy I knew, a guy that I had gone on mission trips with his kids, and they served in the children's ministry with us, he stopped in the office, and you could tell he was super flustered. He's like, "Hey, have you guys seen my daughter? She just left home, and I thought maybe she'd come here." And we said, "No, she didn't come here." We said, "Is everything okay?" He's like, "She got in a ton of trouble today at school. Like a ton of trouble. And she came home and then she just went off. And we're all really worried about her. She feels really bad. She's worried about what's going to happen." And we said, "Yeah, she didn't stop here. We'll keep an eye out. We'll call you if she stops here." And so as he's driving off and just gets almost out of sight, we're like, "Why don't we go help him?" They said she had been driving in the area not much longer, and it was a cold day. And he also said she didn't have very much gas, so she wasn't going to be driving for long. She was just driving for a little bit. We were worried because it was 5 degrees out, and if her car ran out of gas, it'd be very cold. And so we start to drive around, and I remember the excitement as we'd see the car that she drove. It'd be the same color, it'd be the same make, it'd be the same model. We'd be like, "This is the car." There was even, we were told there was a dent in the back passenger door, and I remember rolling up to a restaurant, seeing the car with the make, the model, the color, the dent in the back door, and I was like, "This is it." And we called the dad, and we're like, "We think we found the car." We look in the car, she's not in the car. There's a car seat in the car, and we don't know why. This seems like maybe it's not the car. And we look in the restaurant, she's not there. A couple minutes later, the dad finds a picture. The license plate, the car we found was not right. And so we keep looking. We keep looking, and as we're looking, various people have to stop looking because they have commitments through the night. And so we're kind of hopping back and forth between a lot of people's cars, looking for this daughter. And it gets to like 10 p.m. He came to the church office at like 4 o'clock, and we're still looking at 10 p.m., driving in and out of neighborhood streets, looking down both ways. At 10 p.m., my friend that I was with was like, "I got to get home to my family." He didn't give up hope. He just hoped she was somewhere safe that we couldn't find. And so I hopped in the car with the dad at that point. And the thing I'll never forget is as we're driving around looking for his daughter, who probably is feeling guilt and shame and worry about what's going to happen after she got in so much trouble. All those feelings are going around. As I'm driving around riding with her dad looking for her, he never lost his love. The thing he kept saying over and over was, "Just come home, sweetie. Just come home." And in that same way, you are so important to God that he will always lovingly pursue you.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us online today to catch up on church. We're so glad you could do that. And we just wanted to say, if you were here online, we closed the service live with the song Wide Open by North Point Inside Out. Look that up on YouTube or look that up online somehow. I think that song really blessed us and reminded us a lot about the story of the prodigal son in service. And so we wanted you to get a chance to do that as well. But after that song, I got the chance to go back up on stage and share that at 12:30 that night, the girl made it home. And the father texted everybody who had been searching all night, and he was filled with celebration. And I'm sure many of the people on that text thread were sleeping at that point, but everybody responded with celebration. If he likes to party, we like to party. And so for those of you who give and those of you who serve and everything you do for Horizons, thank you for helping us create a party week after week. There's my dog. Thanks for helping us create a party week after week for people who want to come home to God. What you do is so important, and we're so glad that you're part of this.